I'll explain what I mean by that. When he leaked those emails from the Democratic Party, it showed that Hillary Clinton was fully well aware that the Qatari and Saudi Arabian governments were funding ISIS. Not the individuals, not individual private citizens in those countries, but that governments themselves are supporting ISIS. She was fully aware of that. She didn't do anything with that information. She didn't do anything to act on it, to try and pressure Saudi Arabia to stop funding ISIS. She didn't do anything. Now, Julian Assange revealed that to us by publishing that leaked email.
Content over everything!
That man should be seen as a hero for that. That he's showing the West really what kind of leaders we have, who are, so underhanded as someone like Hillary Clinton. I think he should be regarded as a hero. Sadly, though, the press in this country, even the liberal press like The Guardian, have really tried to do everything they can to turn public opinion against Julian Assange, through smears, through outright lies, fabrications, insults, put-downs. Because he's dangerous to the establishment. He's showing the people, just ordinary people like you and me, what kind of leaders we really have.
Interesting that he had information about Trump in the lead up to the 2016 election that he chose not.
Really? Is that true?
Yes, he has admitted. He said in the interview that they had information, but he didn't want to release it because he couldn't see how it would be worse than what was already being said about Trump.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. It's like the Pentagon Papers. When Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers, a lot of people were surprised. They were like, well, we actually already know this. The American government, we know what they're doing in Vietnam. We don't really need to know, all this leaked information. I mean, it was helpful. It kind of rounded out the edges of what activists were saying about the US government. But in a way, yeah, he's right. It was a revelation, though, that Hillary Clinton was well aware that one of the West's key allies was supporting ISIS, and yet did nothing to stop it. And if I think the Democratic Party knew that about Saudi Arabia, it sure as hell believe that MI5 and MI6 knew that. So our own security services in Britain knew that, and they did nothing to act on it. That says a lot about the spooks in this country as well. They should be doing a lot more, but they're not. To protect national security, right? That's what they're supposed to be there for. That's what they're paid to do. So, yeah. And there's now been another lie, similar in the vein of what this man's just said here. There's been another lie that Julian Assange met with Paul Manafort, the advisor to Donald Trump during his campaign. That Paul Manafort came to visit Julian Assange in the embassy. There's absolutely no evidence of this. It's actually surprising. The media in Britain are very propagandist, no doubt about it, if you look at them closely, what they're doing. But they very rarely outright fabricate things. They don't often just come out with complete lies. But that is an outright fabrication. That's quite worrying that our supposedly leading liberal newspaper, The Guardian, is coming out with outright fabrications. That should be seen as that warning bells should be going off, I think. So I've already spoken for about 10 minutes now. My name is Kyle Farron. I've come to Speaker's Corner for about a year and a half. People don't know me here. What I'd like to try and do is get other people to speak on the ladder as well. So if anybody here would like to get up and say something, maybe you'd like to say something? Address the crowd?
No, I don't have anything to say.
No? For 10 minutes, anybody, has someone a message, burning message they'd like to tell the world? No? All right, well, I'll keep speaking then. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, I hope you have a nice day at Speaker's Corner. I'm going to have a break because my voice is getting sore already. Thanks a lot. Do you mind watching?
In Prague, very bad things because they lead to addictions and ruin people's lives.
So you're almost like using a utilitarian morality to determine what is right and wrong to do with drugs.
Sounds about right.
So then, would you go as far as say ecstasy? Pretty good.
People have died on ecstasy. I remember Leah Betts. I'm showing my age now, but when I was in school, Leah Betts, maybe a different person. I'm very old.
Yeah.
She drowned because she took too much water. I know people who have died on ecstasy, so not necessarily good.
There was a doctor that the government hired to look into the dangers of drugs, and he did a report on how dangerous is ecstasy, and he found that it's less dangerous than horse riding. More people have died horse riding than taking ecstasy. So if I was to present that evidence to you, would you say that maybe high reporting on ecstasy drug deaths and low reporting on horse deaths would cause a skewed opinion on the dangers of ecstasy?
Is that proportional?
Yeah, very proportional.
So there's many people think ecstasy is ride horses.
No, but we can say the ratio of users to death can then be extrapolated to users of horses and deaths of horses, riders. Would you then say let's legalise ecstasy?
I think it depends on whether something. I don't know. It's not something I'm
We
giving a
got
lot
to
of
don't
thought
know.
to.
We
Yeah.
got to the don't know. He's on the fence.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, given the evidence, we should. Or maybe we should take in other threads of evidence. There are other things to consider. But wouldn't you agree? You don't think there are other things to consider? You're going to let me finish?
Came late.
You came late. You want me to start from the beginning?
No. Just start from Gillette. Just start from Gillette and then go for it.
Gillette. I don't get the reference.
Okay.
Something about a beard. Did you get the reference?
Can I get that cup and speak?
Certainly. I've been Jamie Page. I come here every Sunday, so I'm going to have a hat. If you want to put money in it, you're more than welcome.
And in return, you get very good value ecstasy tablets.
Yeah, that's true
And
actually.
then you get yourself a proper haircut and get rid of that man.
Yeah,
It's lovely.
it's lovely. Thank you.
It looks like a flower or something. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Perks of being a wallflower. Anyway, goodbye. Thank you very much.
Do you know when during Japanese feudalism, if you cut that off, that bun, that was the height of dishonor.
Are you
for
trying
a
to fit
samurai.
in?
Sorry?
Are you trying to fit in with the beard
Yeah,
now?
I'm trying to. I'll probably take about 10 years to get that. So I was earlier speaking about Julian Assange. My name is Kyle Farron. Before my friend Jamie got up and spoke. I'd like to speak a bit more broadly now. That was very specific on one character that the British state has been persecuting. I'd like to look at just Britain's strategy in general for dealing with other countries, dealing with the world. I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the UK government has a terrible strategy for dealing with other countries. Overall, it's a terrible, evil strategy for dealing with other countries. It's a regular, systematic violator of human rights. It's one of the main worldwide armament suppliers to human rights abusing regimes. It's fundamentally anti-democratic overseas, and it is one of the main, most loyal collaborators with US terrorism and US aggression in general. That is my, I put it to you.
Straight out of the book of Chomsky.
Sorry?
That's straight out of Chomsky's school of thought. That's a
Chomsky,
horrible concept. If you said one of the worst offenders of human rights, when there are people literally getting slaughtered for religious beliefs, women aren't allowed to leave the home without the guardianship of males in certain communities or countries, and you're equating the UK with those tyrannical regimes. Well, you said one of the worst and evil, which is very strong language when contrasted against regimes like that.
I said the United Kingdom government has one of the most evil foreign policies. That's what I said. In fact, great powers in general, it's one of the ways they stay powerful. To concentrate that much power into the hands of a few men, and a few women now as well. That requires very underhanded and violent policies. I didn't equate the United Kingdom with Saudi Arabia or any of those other countries. I didn't do that at all. We enjoy some degree of civil liberty in England. We should be very proud of that. That's on the backs of millions of men and women who've struggled over hundreds of years for democracy, for the vote, for more and more human rights, for the weekend. The fact that you are here on the weekend and you're not working, that came from a struggle. It's all owed to other people.
Henry Ford.
None of us are really self-made men. Yeah, but Henry Ford, he was recognizing an unstoppable tide of union activism, of labor struggle. He was recognizing that unstoppable process in modern industry, and he decided to go with it for the benefit of, as much as he could for the benefit of his class.
It's better than
Now,
communism.
going back to the United Kingdom, yeah, we enjoy certain civil liberties over here. You mentioned women's rights. Last time I was at Speaker's Corner, back in 2018, I spoke about Bangladesh, which is near the very, very bottom for women's rights. It's one of the worst countries to be a female of any age. And it's kind of a neo-colony of the United Kingdom today. In many ways, the colonial project of the United Kingdom finished, but its imperial domination of other countries hasn't. Bangladesh is a country where there are numerous export processing zones where women can spend 24-hour shifts or more just producing clothes for the West. Many of the clothes I might be wearing could have come from there. This is a country with, like I said, one of the worst places to be a woman. One of the worst places to be a trade union activist as well. If you're trying to organize poor people in the slums of Bangladesh, it could be a very dangerous activity. They call it a counter-terrorism squad, but it's more like a death squad. In the Bangladesh, it's called the Rapid Action Battalion. This is a death squad, essentially goes around torturing, killing activists, students, trade unionists, women's rights campaigners, anybody who might get in the way of production, anyone who might improve the lot of the poor and help reduce the poverty of the slums in Bangladesh, they could be on the hit list. Now, that Rapid Action Battalion is one of the main arms. It was supplied with arms by the United Kingdom. You can research this. Just look in the parliamentary register, or the record, Hansard it's called, right? The record. You'll find they've debated this in Parliament. You don't hear about it in the media. Maybe it comes out in one or two places, but it's not a. When we commit crimes, it's not really crimes, right? It's actually just trade. We're just selling them weapons, right? And they know very well, the British government, what they're doing. Bangladesh is a very important source of cheap labor, and they want to keep it that way. They don't want to change. They don't want to improve they don't want to bring Bangladesh up to the level we are in terms of our civil liberties and our economics.
Aren't there regulations that factories need to adhere to for us to trade with them? The UK actually sets in place certain laws. So, as an example, child labour. We will not trade. You're not legally allowed to trade with a nation which employs child labour. So again, you're pointing to the wrongs of others, and then saying we're the evil ones. Where we actually put in place laws that make it rules for us to trade.
How well are they regulated? Even our factories over here are not well regulated.
So again,
a woman gave birth in the middle of sports direct's warehouse, so I don't really know.
If a factory is found and proven to have child labour, we are not allowed as a country to trade with that factory, I believe.
China, one of the biggest child labour producers in the world.
So if you do business in China, there are trading laws that apply. So all I'm saying is, I'm not saying we're perfect, but I'm saying we actually have laws to try and prevent this. Yet you're saying we're the biggest evil. You said we have the evil.
No, I never said that.
You said we have one of the most evil. You said we have one of the most evil foreign policies. Unless maybe I misheard you.
And by we, I mean the United Kingdom government.
Yeah, but I'm saying the United.
We are not the same as our state.
United Kingdom
the state we live under involuntarily.
The United Kingdom government sets in place laws to try and prevent you from purchasing goods that have been made by children. You don't do anything. You just go to Primark, Next, wherever you buy your clothes, and pick them off the shelf. Yet the government who actually puts in place laws to try and prevent you doing that, you're calling evil.
So no, the UK is, again, it's not. This is the image presented to the world. The UK is essentially a benign power doing its best to improve the lot of poor people around the world. Again, the facts, the historical record and the facts, and even the government's own record themselves paints a very different picture. Reality is a lot more unsettling. Actually, I found it when I was reading through some of the extracts from. If you want to find out what powerful people are, up to, just find out what they're saying to each other. You can go. One thing about the UK is it's relatively transparent. So you can actually go to the National Archives in Kew and find out what previous foreign ministers have said to each other about their, about their government, the way they deal with other countries. They themselves have a very different message they say to each other in private. What they say to the cameras is that Britain stands up for human rights. But they themselves privately very often know what they're doing is contrary to human rights. In fact, or they don't even mention human rights. It's just not even a question. It's not on the table.
So all those debates that happen in Parliament,
yes, we have international law.
Past,
This gentleman mentions international law, that Britain is prevented from trading with countries that use child labour. I'm not too sure about that. If that's there, that's a good step in the right direction. But remember, Britain is essentially a rogue state. It'll obey international law where it finds it useful to do so, where it coincides with the interests of big business in the UK. Companies like HSBC and BP. It will obey international law, but where it's inconvenient, it's more than happy to disobey international law. For example, it violated the Geneva Accords when it helped the United States invade South Vietnam and then later North Vietnam. It was more than happy to help the United States do that. We like to say we didn't take part in Vietnam, but SAS troops actually did fight against the Viet Minh in North Vietnam. They did embedded in a section of the US Marines. They did go and do an incursion there. Iraq as well. Iraq is the most obvious example. Complete disregard for international law. We like to portray it as a mistake or a tragedy or a blunder. No, it wasn't. It wasn't any of those things. It was an illegal war act of aggression against another country, unprovoked attack on another country, which by some estimates, according to the most prestigious medical journal I know of, the Lancet, English medical journal, it's led to about more than 1 million deaths. That's more than 1 million deaths. The Vietnam War led to more than 3 million deaths. The Indonesian massacre in East Timor, where Britain was consistently selling parts for helicopters, training up their generals and so on.
that
led
against
to about
communism?
that led to about 200,000 deaths of East Timorese people, mostly Catholics, not actually communists, mostly Catholics. The war in Yemen in the 1960s and 70s, where Britain was backing Saudi Arabia as it tried to attack Yemen. Not the current violence against Yemen, although that is also very noteworthy as well, devastating a small, poor, starving country. But the original conflict is partly spearheaded by Dick White. Again, this is all on the record. You can read what they've said themselves, these people. But what about the fact that, the United Kingdom essentially started the Vietnam War? When the French tried to reconquer Indochina, Britain was there, on the scene, straight after World War II, 1945. They were there, collaborating with Vichy French. Remember, these are ex-Nazi collaborators, arming them up to help them take back their country from the Viet Minh, the nationalist peasants. They armed up Japan. This is, you could read about this. Tim Harper and other academics have written about this. Ian Cobain as well, the journalist, who Andrew Marr recently said his book was fantastic, and I agree, it's a very good book. Ian Cobain has gone into this. Britain has fought numerous secret wars, kept from the public. I mentioned the war in Bangladesh, where actually government ministers have been attacked by the Rapid Action Battalion. What about the Sri Lankan genocide, where Tamils, it's estimated up to 40,000 Tamils were killed in 2009. The attacks on Bangladeshi people, that was 2011. That was the time we were accusing Gaddafi of possibly going to commit a genocide in Benghazi, maybe, with no evidence that he was going to do that. At the same time, we were actively supporting the Bangladeshi government in cracking down on women's rights activists, trade union activists. They know very well, the British government, that human rights, when they conflict with big business concerns, they'll get out of the way. Like I mentioned Sri Lanka, again, one of our main allies in Asia. When the government was attacking the Tamils, when they were trying to separate from the rest of Sri Lanka, Britain was more than happy to trade with Sri Lanka, sell them weapons, sell them helicopters. We actually we manned some of the helicopters. We allowed the mercenary services, Kini Mini services, KMS. We allowed them to go in and help the Sri Lankan government. I mean, it's a frightful record, really. I mean, in very many ways, if you take an honest look at British foreign policy, it's a record of crimes against humanity, one after the other. And often the British people have no idea about what's going on. Very little idea. And when they do have an idea, such as with Iraq, they all go out there. Millions of them will form into the streets. So my criticism is not of the British people. They're some of the nicest, most gentle people I know, unwarlike people I've met, the British people. But their government is something else. It's quite shocking. One of the most egregious examples I've been reading about is Britain's support for the State of Israel, which is doing something quite unusual in modern history. It's actually destroying a whole nation of people.
Which nation would that be?
Slowly but surely, the Palestinian nation.
Okay, so
slowly but surely, ethnically, since 1948, in a very kind of forceful way, but even before that, laying the groundwork for that ethnic cleansing.
Okay, stop. Ethnic cleansing. Can you just elaborate on that?
Ethnic cleansing. It's kind of the clues in the name.
Yeah, from where? No, but from who's been ethnically cleansed?
I'd say the Palestinian people are being ethnically cleansed by the State of Israel.
When?
I'd say, like I said, I just said,
there was no state
in a very sort of earnest way since 1948. But like I said, the groundwork was laid for it beforehand as well.
So just to pick you up on that, so Jews, Palestinians, they both lived in the land, yeah? Jews and Arabs.
Yeah, no, there was Jewish people that were there before before Zionism was even a concept. Yeah.
And your criticism of the British in this situation is that they facilitated the ethnic cleansing of one people from that land.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
So what I would point out to you is one of the most noble things that the British ever did is the previous regimes that controlled that region were imperial in the true sense. They went in, they conquered the land and they claimed it for themselves. They pulled tributes, they pulled the resources out of that area. So the Ottoman Empire was the controlling force before the British. When the British, or the Allies, defeated the Ottomans in World War I, what they did one of the most progressive things that any nation did, or any empire did before that. They said, we're going to give you people the right to self-determination. They were following the American Woodrow Wilson's 14 principles.
So can I just actually have the right to self-determination? That makes no sense.
Okay.
97% of the population said that they want.
Let me just address this point, please,
because you want free.
It revolves. Can I please finish a point? Okay, great. Well done. the British actually gave the land. So Iraq, Saudi, Arabia to a degree, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, all these nations were created by the colonialists going in and saying, actually, we're going to give the land to you people, the indigenous people, are going to have states. The Ottomans before it conquered it, the different caliphates before it, and the Christians before it actually created, just usurped, annexed this territory into their empires. The British did the opposite. They said, Jews and Arabs are living in this land, we're going to give you the right to self-determination. They were given mandatory Palestine on the condition they create the Jewish national home there. The first thing they did in 1921 was give 75% of the land to Jordan.
False history.
To Jordan, to the Arabs. So,
Sorry.
mandatory Palestine was Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jordan. The entirety, that was mandatory Palestine. The League of Nations awarded them the land on the condition they create a Jewish national home there. The first thing they did was give 75% to the Arabs. It actually isn't. To an Arabian family called the Hashemites. The Hashemites took control of most of the Middle East. They told the British that we represent the Arabs who live here. But the British did something noble. They gave the land back. They didn't keep it.
No, they didn't.
No, they were kind of driven out.
kept
I'd say
the
they were
land.
driven
The
out.
British weren't. No.
There was repeated uprisings by both Jews and Arabs.
So when they were given mandatory Palestine, they were given it on the condition that they create national homes for the indigenous people. That was the whole San Remo. That's why the League of Nations gave all the land back. That's how you have Syria. That's how you have Jordan. That's how you have Israel.
Again, the reality is very different. The reality is very different.
Pakistan.
There's a certain narrative presented to us, but the reality is different. You read the key sort of diplomatic documents like the Balfour Declaration. They reveal a lot. Balfour himself, Lord Balfour, was a Christian Zionist.
Yeah.
Remember, Christian Zionism far predates Jewish Zionism, or Zionism as it's understood by many Jews.
Sorry.
Building a new temple of Jerusalem so the end times come.
So what you're saying again is
Lord
factually
Balfour
incorrect.
Lord Balfour
Zionism
essentially, when he wrote that declaration, there's actually no mention of Palestinians in the declaration. That says a lot about that,
because the
British,
Palestinians didn't exist as a people.
The
Palestinians did not exist as a people.
How they understood them. They spoke about them as various populations.
Who are the Palestinians?
Various indigenous people.
When did the
There's no mention of Palestinians.
When did the Palestinians take on the identity of Palestinians?
Palestinians were the people that
been there
basically
for
rose up
centuries.
against the Ottomans in order to get the land.
Again, Palestinian identity largely evolved in the 60s. There was pan-Arabism. Most of the Arabs that were living there supported the idea of a pan-Arab nation. A pan-Arab...
Pan-Arabism is a much older idea than just... For example,
Palestinians. Who was a Palestinian leader?
You mentioned when... This gentleman mentions when Britain and France carved up the Middle East into various states. There was when the Ottoman Empire fell, many Arabs wanted to create Arabia, one big country in the Middle East. They were promised that by the British, actually. Lawrence of Arabia, remember, they were promised the Arabs would help the British drive out the Ottoman Empire, and they had their reasons for doing that. They wanted to weaken the enemy during World War I. In return for that, they would give them Arabia, the whole country. But no, they didn't. They went back on that agreement and they carved it up into little pieces. It's divide and rule. It's the oldest concept in the book.
So, just want to fact check you on one thing. I want to fact check you. You said there was a Palestinian people. I'm asking.
I just want to when I mention ethnic cleansing, I'll give an example of what I mean by ethnic cleansing.
Perfect.
In 1948, with the help of the British, the active stepping aside, which I see as help, really. That the state of Israel was formed, and in the process of being formed, they drove out about half of the Palestinian population from Palestine, and they destroyed half of the Palestinian towns and villages. There's numerous reports of rape and trauma perpetrated on the people by the Israeli army.
Slaughtering.
This is, again, not really discussed in the media.
Because
Israel's today one of the main allies of the United Kingdom.
I have to fact check you again.
Israel is receiving millions of pounds worth of arms and trade from Britain.
So
they're one of the main trading partners of the United Kingdom government.
Checking you.
We're not allowed to really debate this.
Okay, so we are debating it, but you're running away. You're not letting me speak.
Can I speak? I'll let you speak for quite a while, so do you mind if I address the crowd?
But you're lying.
I'm not here to have a conversation with you.
But you're lying.
I'm not here to have a conversation.
You're lying.
I'm here to have a conversation with everybody.
British led the Jordanian armies. British armed the Jordanians. The Israelis were attacking the British. And you said the British helped the Israelis.
I'd like to address
Who
the
were the
crowd as a
Ergun
whole.
fighting? Who were the fighting?
I'd like to address the crowd as a whole, not just you.
But you lie.
I'd like to address the crowd as
You
a whole.
either are ignorant or you willfully lie.
Joseph,
I'm not
it's
lying
quite
about
clear you
anything.
don't care
I made a
about the
simple
life of
contention.
Palestinians, so please
I said
let
that.
him
A million
I said
Jews were
that.
driven from Arab
I
lands.
said that.
Where's
I
your
said
sympathy?
that. I said that. An ethnic cleansing took place.
An ethnic cleansing of a million Jews.
Place
No,
in
fairness,
1948.
A million Jews.
Even Israeli historians have called it.
Yeah, they were.
People like Ilan
Immigrants
Pape,
were sent to America.
Jewish American historians like Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky.
they weren't
They've written about it
They
very,
weren't allowed access.
very detailed. You can read about the ethnic cleansing.
And you
in
can also
Palestine.
read historians like Ephraim Karsh who actually specialise and aren't linguists like Chomsky and aren't propagandists like
You
Finkelstein.
don't have to be a. You don't have to be a.
No, but I'm giving you actual
academic
academics
historian
from the
to
field.
write history. Now, again, this ethnic cleansing is still happening.
There is
slowly
no
but surely.
ethnic cleansing. The Palestinian population
Slowly but
grows
surely.
year on year.
Can I
Grows year on year.
My friend, sorry.
Year on year.
My friend, I let you speak for quite a while. I actually let you speak for about 5 minutes straight. I didn't interrupt.
But you're just lying.
Yep.
You're lying about
I heard
Jews
you-
and they're my
I heard-
people.
I heard numerous things you were saying that they sounded like lies to me, but I let you finish. Alright, so can you do the same to me?
Okay, I'll let you finish and I'll respond.
Try and be some. You know, you're older than me. You should have a bit more respect.
You got told off.
That's true. It's like,
Secondary school.
now, again, it's you know, my original. I'm not even here to try and criticize the state of Israel. I don't live in Israel. If there was a speaker's corner in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, and I happen to be an Israeli citizen, and I happen to have a conscience and an eye to looking at history, I might get up and I might speak out against the crimes of the state. I might get out and I might speak out against Zionism. But I live in the United Kingdom. I'm of English and Irish descent. I'm more interested in what's been going on in these islands and what the British Empire have done historically. Sorry?
Are you Israeli?
Oh, I'm an Irish citizen.
Wait, you
But
said
I'm
you're
interested.
English and
I
Irish.
live in the United Kingdom and I live under the state. So I'm
you
interested
been
in
to
what this
Israel?
state is doing.
He hasn't.
Have you been to Israel?
I haven't been to the state of Israel.
He's read Chomsky.
Visit Israel and
I read a book, could be fiction, I don't know, but it's called Warriors in Jedin. And before I read that book, I had no understanding about Palestine or any of it, completely ignorant. And if I'm honest, I read that book and it really changed my worldview and made me feel, you know, up until reading that, I'd always been very sympathetic to Israel because of everything that happened previously. I don't have enough facts, you can challenge me a million times, I can't have an academic argument, but I know I cried at the end of that book. And I cried mainly for the fact that, given what had just happened in Germany and Europe, that people couldn't then be charitable to the people, to the Palestinians.
Like all
Greeks.
conflicts, to all
Remember,
conflicts,
the Americans
there's
have the
all-
same attitude to Europeans.
Like all conflicts, horrible things happen. In the 1947-48 Civil War, horrible things happened on both sides. Up until Operation Plan D, the Israelis did not attack villages, they did not attack anything. Came Operation D, the Israelis were taking a hiding, they were getting slaughtered. The community in Jerusalem had been completely cut off. They said, in this instances, and it's the villages you're speaking of, where we're being attacked from certain garrisons within villages and towns, in those instances, we will actually drive the people out of that because we're getting slaughtered. The Arab Liberation Army based their army out of villages and towns. And so they launched attacks on Jewish communities from those communities. So like any conflict, horrible things happen.
I've read a book that's meant to be emotive, but it made me feel, in my mind, everything that I'd been taught about the European war and how Jewish people were treated, it literally made me feel like
Novels have a tremendous power to do that. You could read all the hundreds of pages of history, and it'll give you the facts. But then actually, you might read one novel, short novel, and it could actually, and then that'll drive you to act.
But
It'll drive you to act on that knowledge.
To your
share
point,
what you know.
To your point, in 1948, Israel was invaded by 8 Arab armies. One militia of Palestinians, so the Palestinian ground troops, the Arab Liberation Army, which was a collection of armies from all over. They were attacked by Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Egypt. They were attacked by 6 major Arab armies. And in response, those horrible things happened on both sides. I'm not saying that Israelis were
both
perfect.
sides
I'm not saying Israelis were perfect in 1948. In 48, Israelis and the Arabs did horrible things.
Can I say
A million Jews were driven from Arab lands and fled to Israel. Arabs who were living in the Israeli side, some of them were forced to flee. And Israelis that were living in the West Bank and Gaza, some of them were forced to flee. One of my best friends came from Gaza. Their family had lived there for centuries and centuries and centuries. They were driven out. Horrible things happened on both sides. But the charge of ethnic cleansing is a gross distortion of what happened when a million Jews were actually driven from their homes, which they'd lived in before the birth of Islam, around the Arab world.
Okay, listen, my contention is simple, that the state of Israel is ethnically cleansed and continues to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. You can go and look,
From where? From where?
You can go and look at the history yourself. might want to read. What was the historian you mentioned?
Ephraim Karsh.
Ephraim Karsh, you might want to read him. I'd also recommend authors like Ilan Pappé, he's an Israeli historian.
He's been called by Benny Morris a propagandist.
He's been a really tremendous, useful resource. I've been reading this
and
fantastic
slaughtered
book.
by the academic community.
I bought this on Notting Hill Gate. It's called The Wrong Story: Palestine, Israel, and the Media, and it's written by a Canadian academic at the University of Guelph Humber in Toronto, and his name is Greg Shupak, and he has a whole chapter called "Not Both Sides," and it's dealing with that idea of both sides have done bad things to each other. The reality is, most of the violence has been done by the state of Israel towards Palestinians.
6 Arab armies plus
majority
2
of that
militias
violence.
invaded Israel.
Wait,
How's that an act of aggression from Israel? Because you're lying.
My friend,
You
repeatedly-
lie.
Yeah, but if you think I'm lying, that doesn't give you a right to interrupt me.
Well, the Speaker's Corner it kind of does.
Well, let's have some politeness, you know. Speaker's Corner doesn't have to be rude.
But you have to be fact-checked when you say mistruths.
Like,
In
we can take
1948,
turns.
okay,
Hold on, why don't we
simple
take turns?
question. In
Do you
1948,
do you
what
have a phone
happened?
on you? Do you have a phone on you?
I do have a phone, yeah.
You could do 5 minutes each, 10 minutes each.
Okay.
That way we could.
All right.
You could time it on your phone.
Perfect.
My batteries haven't run out for some reason. It broke.
Perfect. No, I'm 5 minutes,
You want to
5
do
minutes.
that? There's
Perfect.
plenty of time. We have all Sunday afternoon. There's no need for interruptions and accusations of lying. Try and what's the word? Be
Decorum.
decorum. Exactly. Even in the House of Commons, they call right honourable friend. You know, there's a formal, charitable idea of looking at your opponent. Yeah.
We got the Speaker. This is Mr. Burko. He's the Speaker of the
My
House. He'll
intention is
control
not
me.
to lie. If you think I'm lying, it's not my intention not to lie. I see my role as to come to Speaker's Corner, to speak the truth and expose lies. So this idea that somehow in Israel and Palestine the violence is kind of roughly equal on both sides, it's a lie. I see it as a lie. The violence is overwhelmingly done by the state of Israel towards Palestinian people. I'm not saying Palestinians have never committed crimes against Israelis. That'd be completely false to say that. I'm not even denying the existence of Palestinian terrorism.
The war in 1948 instead of the Jews. What do you think would have happened to the Jews?
I have no idea. I'm not interested in counterfactuals. It's a parlor game. It's a parlor game. We could talk about. We could. There's a historian who used to ask the question: what would happen if Cleopatra's nose had been slightly out of shape? What kind of history would we have had? Would the Roman Empire have declined faster? Would it have ended quicker? Would it have taken longer to end? We could talk about this forever. We could talk about speculations. Very often, very right-wing historians like Niall Ferguson like to get people talking about counterfactuals. What would have happened if the British Empire didn't do this, or the Israelis didn't do this? And it's very useful for them because it gets them onto the stage of there's no fact involved there. It's just speculation, right? It's a very useful strategy to divert attention from the real history of what actually happened. Because there's no way to falsify or disprove what they're saying, because they're speculating. They're speculating.
Around the Arab world, and they say they wish that Israel didn't exist, and if they could have their way, there would not be any Jewish state
So
there
what?
within any.
So what, Mike? This is not undermining my contention.
That allows Arabs to live.
I'm not drawing any equivalencies. I'm making it very clear. The Israeli state is responsible for most of the violence against Palestinians. It's not both sides. The media very commonly portray it like this. The New York Times, The Guardian, they like to portray it as both sides have committed this violence equally, but it's very often not the case. I'll read you this first page from Greg Shupak's chapter on But Not Both Sides. The New York Times' editorials on Operation Protective Edge, Israel's assault on the Gaza Strip in the summer of 2014, demonstrate that the both sides narrative is commonplace and flawed. The UN reports that during the hospitalities, I think it's a typo, he meant to say hostilities, but he said hospitalities. During the hospitalities, 2,251 Palestinians died, including 1,460 civilians, 556 of whom were children, while 900 were permanently disabled, 100,000 had their homes destroyed or severely damaged, and 258 schools and 78 hospitals and clinics in Gaza were damaged. 68 Israelis were killed. 68 Israelis were killed, 5 of them civilians and 1 of them a child. In early June of that year, the two most powerful Palestinian political forces, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, PA, reached an agreement on a national consensus government. Israel considered Hamas, which had won the most recent election in Gaza, remember, free and fair elections, keep that in mind, in Gaza, a terrorist entity, whereas the PA governed by the West Bank and coordinated security there with Israel. By June 2014, Hamas's relations with key allies in Iran and Syria frayed over Hamas's reluctance to side with the Syrian government in the war in that country. In Egypt, the Hamas-allied Muslim Brotherhood was ousted in 2013, in the 2013 coup through which General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi took power. I'll just quickly digression. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is also one of the worst dictators in the Middle East, and again, a big ally of the United Kingdom. Remember, we're allowed all we want to criticize Iran in the media. That's more than encouraged, right? Iran is the enemy, Syria, the Syrian government, the enemy. But when we look at our own backyard, our own allies, Israel and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, don't even get me started on Saudi, where that's off the agenda. Those dictatorships, which in many ways are also terrible and deny human rights. And like I said, in the case of the Israeli state, are ethnic cleansers. And in fact, I'm from South Africa originally, I was born there, and it was an apartheid state, as many people know. And interestingly, another apartheid state backed by the United Kingdom as well, right the way through. But that, in many ways, was better than what the Palestinians are experiencing now. Black people were never kept in giant open-air prisons in South Africa. I mean, that's what the Gaza Strip essentially is. It's a giant open-air prison. They were never kept in one of those. That's unheard of. So to even call, I like what Noam Chomsky says, to call the state of Israel an apartheid state is actually a good thing. That's a gift to Israel. They would rather be known as that than what they really are, which is actively ethnically cleansing the people of that state.
That's 5
now,
minutes.
I'll continue on. Hamas was internationally isolated and cash-starved, and it therefore agreed to a unity government that would be dominated by the PA and that would recognize Israel and reject violence. However, as I explained in Chapter 3, Israel, the US, and its European partners sabotaged the deal. These were the political dynamics underlying Operation Protective Edge. And then he discusses overall the abductions and killings of Palestinians and Israeli youth, Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, and rocket fire into Israel by Hamas and other political factions. Now, whatever you think of brown people or Palestinians, whatever, you might have some unconscious biases against them, and you may not care about them as much as you care about more European-looking people. But just think for a second then, if you struggle to empathize, do what this lady here did. Read a novel about it. Novels can give you a very interesting subjective look at what's happened. You can really get inside the head of a Palestinian, or an Israeli for that matter. There's a growing voice of Jewish people in the United States as well, who are more and more now gathering steam and trying to reject Israeli violence, trying to hold out another option for policy in the Middle East.
Okay, so that's 5 minutes.
Trying to show that actually we don't have to rely on Israeli violence to control. Well, we don't have to be trying to dominate the Middle East and use Israel to do that.
Are you going to honour yourself?
Doesn't have to be doing that.
That's 5 minutes.
He's been speaking for 5 minutes. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead. Would you like to get up on the ladder and say something?
It was fine. I'm fine being on the
Because
go.
people need to see you. It's not,
Okay,
it's
fine,
not a
fine.
discussion with me, it's for the whole audience. Thank you very much for listening. He's going to speak now.
First, I've been coming to Speaker's Corner for 7 years. This is the first time I've ever gotten a ladder or a platform. Okay, so first and foremost, the first mistruth to correct is you claimed that this was an Israeli-Palestinian conflict and that Israel was the aggressor and that the Palestinians were the victims of this aggression. So the conflict really broke out in 1948. In 1947, the international community voted on a partition of the land, and they voted that a Jewish state and an Arab state should be created in the region of Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. Israel, although losing a lot of the conflict territory it originally believed it was owed, declared independence. The response was from the Arab world upon Israel declaring independence was 6 Arab armies invaded, plus 2 additional armies made up of militias. So there was the Arab Liberation Army, and there was the Palestinian basic militia, which was the equivalent of the Jewish militias, the Haganah, the Irgun, and Lehi. And so, upon this creation of the state, 8 Arab armies invaded. So in terms of who was the aggressor, first and foremost, it's not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The major wars that have taken place have all been fought between Israel and major Arab states. Now, who were these Israelis that were living here? There was the indigenous community that had lived in Israel for centuries. All of the Middle East was given to the Muslims. When the Ottoman, it's a good, I don't mind the interruption. The Ottoman Empire collapsed in World War I. The occupying, or the power forces that defeated them were the Allies. The Allies then awarded the right to self-determination for all the people that lived there. The only religious minority in the Middle East to get a state were the Jews. And so the entire Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druze, all kinds of people lived in the Middle East. And what happened was the only state that was given to a minority community, the Jewish people, was instantly invaded by 8 Arab armies. So the charge of aggression is wrong. The aggression has always come from the Arab world. The leader, and General Pasha, the leader of the Arab League, declared, "We will pave the roads from Cairo to Jerusalem with the skulls of Jews." The Grand Mufti Hajimin al-Hussein of Jerusalem said, "Muslims, Muslims, I declare a holy war. Slaughter the Jews, slaughter them all." In contrast, in the Declaration of Independence, the Israelis said, "We will give the right, no right will be afforded to the Jews that isn't afforded to the Arabs or the other communities, the minorities that are living in the land." So first and foremost, the principle of aggression. Israel has always been invaded, it has never invaded. So just going to work through the various points you made. So you then started, yeah, please.
And like, I'm not trying to be controversial.
Not at all.
I'm genuinely interested.
Yeah.
But I don't get how it works. I don't get how people can say, like, you can have this if you want to.
So okay. So what they didn't say you can have this. What they said, they followed Woodrow Wilson's 14 principles, which is the right for self-determination of the indigenous people that live in those lands. So before that, the Ottomans controlled it. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. When empires like the Ottomans came, they conquered the land, and the people were forced to pay taxes back to the capital, back to the Ottomans. When the British conquered it, they said, we're going to have a transition, defeated the Ottomans. They said, we've got no place in this land. We're going to transition, go through a transition period and give the land to the people who already live there. Now, Jews, Christians, Muslims had all lived in the land. The Jews were awarded, one of the people that were awarded a state. Other people were also awarded states. It wasn't exclusively for Jews that were awarded a state. And so it's not a case that the British gave something that wasn't there. The British defeated the Ottomans, and in the power vacuum that left, they said we're going to give the right to self-determination to the indigenous people. And Jews were one of those indigenous people. As are many Palestinians. The Arabs came in the 7th century, they conquered the land, and they then became the majority population in there. Arabic became the language, Islam became the biggest religion, but Jews always remained there. There were Jews at the time of the conquest, and there were Jews today. The ethnic cleansing charge is incredibly rich, incredibly rich. There's one Jewish nation in the world. We were slaughtered in the 30s and 40s in Europe and in the Arab world. Slaughtered. The survivors of those massacres in the Arab world and in Europe from the Holocaust fled to Israel. These Holocaust survivors and survivors of Arab massacres are the people you're charging as being the aggressors. They are not, they are refugees. They were fighting for their life, for their existence. You've got Hajimin al-Husseini saying it's a holy war, we're going to slaughter all the Jews. We're going to pave the roads from Cairo to Jerusalem with their skulls. We're going to drive them into the sea. And so this is the Arab League, basically the various Arab forces said they were going to do this.
Why don't you quote David Ben-Gurion a little bit about what he said about Palestinians? So we should ethnically cleanse them.
Absolutely.
Or Theodore Herzl.
Do you bring the quote and I'll respond to each one of those quotes?
I'll find it. I wish I had my phone. I don't have my phone. It doesn't work.
Fuck, I wish I was. And so the ethnic cleansing charge is very rich because what happened was 750,000 Palestinians were displaced. 750,000. That's a large number of Palestinians that lost their homes. So this is what I'm trying to get at. There was 1 million Jews that also lost their homes. So what happened was, when fighting brought out, there were expulsions. In places like Lod and Ramla, where there were Arab Liberation Army garrisons attacking the Jews, those small towns and villages in those areas where attacks were being launched were actually driven out. And they were driven out by the bayonet. Not particularly proud of it, but this was happening on both sides.
Not particularly, just a little bit proud of it.
No. What then happened? What happened was the Arab Higher Committee set out the charge and told the Palestinians to leave because we're going to come in and slaughter the Jews. The Syrian Prime Minister, On Abd al-Hadi, who's a very prominent Palestinian, have both explicitly stated, the Syrian Prime Minister explicitly stated that we told the Palestinians to leave, and that was our biggest mistake. We should have never told them to leave their homes. Haifa was evacuated. The mayor of Haifa, maybe Moshe Levy, pleaded with his Palestinian counterpart, don't leave. We've been living side by side together. We'll make sure that you're given every equality that we have. But the Arab Higher Committee said, if you don't leave, we're going to kill you. So the Arabs from Haifa fled and left. So the charge of ethnic cleansing is not true. In contrast, 1 million Jews who lived in lands like Libya, Egypt, Syria, for centuries and centuries before the Muslim conquest were actually driven out. Go on.
So and I'm really naive about this, but why is the problem still there then? Why don't we just say, right, let's just all stop, there'll be no restrictions, everyone just...
So I think it's a great, it doesn't stop because neither party at the moment, like if you speak to Palestinians and you speak to Israelis on the ground who actually live there, so take the settlers. Everyone hears the word settler as the most demonic, evil word in the world. There's 650,000 of them. Most of them that you meet are just ordinary families, lovely people, and they just want peace with their neighbours. You speak to most Palestinians and people maybe think terrorism. Most Palestinians are lovely people. When you actually, there's good people on both sides, but the political leaders in both conflicts are incapable of finding a solution. There's been numerous peace offers which I believe the Israelis have made to the Palestinians, like the Camp David Tava talks, where the Palestinians were offered 97% of the land, including East Jerusalem. They were given the right to return for some of the refugees of 48, and for those that couldn't make it back, there was $30 billion of compensation offered. So there have been numerous peace offerings that the Israelis have made, which I believe the Palestinians have rejected. You then came on to the Palestinians and you started talking about elections. There have been 2 elections. The last election amongst the Palestinians was 12 years ago. Abbas is sitting his 5th term, he's sitting his 12th-year term of a 5-year or 4-year presidency. It's literally, they don't have elections. They are under tyrannical dictators. So much so that the Palestinian Research and Policy, I've forgotten the name of them, who basically advise the Palestinian Authority of Policy, they did a survey with Tel Aviv University, so Palestinian Policy Organization and Tel Aviv University, did a survey of the Palestinians. Among Palestinians aged 18 to I think 25 would rather live under Israeli rule than Palestinian rule. Why? Because they see Israel sending its prime ministers and presidents to jail, whereas they've got tyrants who are in control of them, who have dictatorships. Which comes to my second point. You talked about apartheid. I mentioned that a Jewish prime minister and a Jewish president were sent to jail. They were sent to jail by Arab judges. The highest judges in Israel are Arabs. Does that sound like apartheid? Druze, who are they're kind of an Arab group, they don't identify as being Arab, but they speak Arabic, and Christian Arabs are the best performing communities, including Jews, in Israel in education. Arabs outperform Israeli Jews, in education. Yet you make the charge of apartheid. I'm sorry, it does. In South Africa, blacks and whites couldn't even drink from the same fountain. They had segregation.
So there's segregation in Israel as well?
There's no segregation in Israel.
What do you call the apartheid wall?
So I call the apartheid wall a border fence.
Okay, right.
No, I'm sorry, because...
And what do you call it? People try to get through and they get harassed by Israeli guards.
So this is a perfect example.
This
is a perfect example.
If they make one argument with the Israeli guards, they get sent back.
This is a perfect example. The gentleman is saying, what is the apartheid wall? Basically, the Palestinians want a sovereign state. The Israelis want a sovereign state. The only way the border fence comes down is if Israel declares sovereignty over it, which neither you nor most of the Palestinians want. They want to have their own state. And so for the wall to come down, which is the border fence, it would mean that it would be the same, it would be part of the same territory. What you're also ignoring is why the wall went up in the first place. Every year, hundreds of Israelis, Arabs, Jews, Christians, everybody, were killed by terror attacks. The wall went down, up, and that dropped to virtually zero for many, many years. The wall is a security fence. You also talked about Gaza. Gaza has 2 borders. Nobody ever complains about Egypt. Israel and Hamas have been at war. Hamas fired 15,000 rockets into Israel before the war you were talking about. 15,000 rockets. Hamas aren't firing rockets into Egypt. Yet who do the world get mad at? They say Israel's imposing a blockade on Gaza. We're at war with Gaza.
I agree. We should be complaining more about
Egypt and Gaza aren't at war. If you want to be mad at somebody about the conditions in Gaza, be mad at the Egyptians, not the Israelis.
I don't think the Egyptians are going and bombing hospitals. They're not blowing up hospitals, my friend.
He's not a Hamas supporter, but he hates Britain and he hates Israel. And I'm saying Britain is amazing. Britain is one of the most beautiful states in the world. We have freedoms which are unmatched. We try to be a moral beacon to the world. And you contrast us to Saudi Arabia? Your opening statement was Britain has the most evil foreign policy in the world.
I never said that. No,
Iran is literally funding proxy groups around the Middle East, causing mass conflict.
Yeah,
you can get up. I've been more than 5 minutes. Thank you. I still hijacked this ladder.
I'll let you get back up again as well. I never said Britain had the most evil foreign policy in the world. I just said it had an evil foreign policy. So that's an exaggeration on your part.
The devil's working out.
Not a big one.
Sorry?
Not a big one.
Not a big one. To say the most evil in the world and to just say evil is it's quite different.
Hey, do you think?
I make moral judgments. I think it's a moral judgment which is sound to make. When you look very closely at the record of British foreign policy, you'll see it's quite shocking. Now, with the case of Israel, again, you probably know more about it than I do. It's very interesting to hear your side of the story. I'm just gonna ignore this because you completely, changed my mind. No, I still haven't changed my mind. I actually think it's worse than apartheid. I think it's worse than South African apartheid. Yeah.
Why?
Again, as I said in my original speech, I said to call it apartheid is actually kind of a gift to Israel. I agree with what Chomsky says. It's true. Because Israelis don't get harassed when they're trying to get through the border to see their families.
Streets of Cape Town.
Sorry?
They actually
when was I last in Israel? I've never been to Israel. So you're saying I have to go to a country before I... Yeah, maybe you're right, yeah.
I would really encourage it. It costs £180 to go there. Everybody get on EasyJet, spend £150, meet Palestinians, meet Israelis, and have a great holiday. It's very safe. You can walk around
the holy sites.
You can go to all the holy sites.
You don't have to go to a country to understand its
But if you can, it's beneficial.
No, you don't. I don't think that's true. For example, when Cambodians were getting massacred in their millions by Pol Pot, you didn't have to go to Cambodia to understand that was a bad.
Cambodians getting massacred in the hundreds of thousands after the
when the Rwandan genocide was taking place, you didn't have to go to Rwanda to understand it was a bad situation. You didn't have to go to Nazi Germany to understand that Nazi Germany was a bad situation to live under. I don't have to go to Sweden to understand it's possibly the most liberated country in the world for women. No, I can just look at United Nations statistics on these things. All right, very often the United Nations human rights groups, you'll get a very good picture of what kind of world we live under.
One quick thing, who's in
just
charge?
Just by reading the newspaper.
Saudi Arabia is in charge of the Human Rights Commission at the UN. Saudi Arabia.
If you want to read,
they're the chair.
If you want to read newspapers, this is a good way to understand the world. Just read the New York Times, the Guardian.
Saudi Arabia would have been
read the Financial Times. It's one of the only newspapers that tells the truth is the Financial Times. That's a good newspaper to read. Or even try a bit more of the unusual newspapers as well. Try the Morning Star, for example. There are a lot of different varieties of different newspapers to try. Yeah, so for example, from the Morning Star, I found out that Theresa May just signed an arms deal with Thailand. Again, one of the worst dictatorships in Southeast Asia. I didn't find that out from any other newspaper. She just signed a deal. The Prime Minister of Thailand came to visit her in Downing Street, and they shook hands on it. It was a big arms deal. One of the world record arms deals with Thailand. And Thailand is one of the worst, along with Turkey, continually has coups, military coups against their democratically elected leaders. I'm not a pacifist. Please stop trying to... James, I'm trying to talk about one thing. I believe there was an ethnic cleansing in Israel. I really do believe it's continuing today. And that was my simple contention. I'll make my very simple argument. The British foreign policy is fundamentally evil. One of the examples in which it is evil is its support for the state of Israel. The way that the Israeli government treats Palestinians and ethnically cleanses them I think it's truly vile. I'm not trying to excuse any violence on the part of Palestinians against Israeli people. I'm not trying to do that in the slightest. Remember what I said. If I was living in Tel Aviv or if I was living in Ramallah or one of these cities, and there was a speaker's corner in Gaza or in Israel, I'd get up and if I was Israeli or if I was Palestinian, I would get up and I'd criticize my own leaders. Like this gentleman said here, it's often the leaders who are at fault here. He's right. It's not the people themselves. Often, can't really blame them too much. Although the settlers are doing something illegal, it's simply illegal to steal land like that. It's not yours. You make out that they're normal people. They are very nice. You can watch Louis Theroux did a documentary. Who spent some time with Israeli settlers.
Louis Theroux is known for interviewing the most sound of mind people.
I never said he was sound of mind. It's very stop trying to.
No, I'm just saying Louis Theroux looks for sensational stories.
Me. Okay, ethnic cleansing. This is again Greg Shupak. The both sides narrative obscures the larger context in which this idea that Israel and Palestine are both equally as bad to each other. It obscures the particular events. Because the state of Israel is not yet 70 years old, and because it has been barely more than 100 years since the future of Palestine became a burning international question, these history's inaugural events continue to directly shape the lives of people in or originating from the region as well as its contemporary politics, and therefore must be a part of any media narrative if it is to accurately inform readers. This history, however, is papered over when the story of Palestine and Israel is presented as one in which both sides have inflicted similar amounts of pain on each other. Both sides. This is the narrative we hear often. It's both sides. It's a hopeless conflict. Both sides are doing it. Developments in the earliest moments of the lead-up to the creation of the State of Israel demonstrate that both sides' narrative is erroneous. In 1917, I'm trying to complement your narrative. You gave a very interesting outline of events as you saw them. This book has got I think, a vastly superior outline to events than the one you gave just. What's your name again? Joseph. The one Joseph just gave. I think this narrative is far more useful I found it far more useful. In 1917, the British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour promised to create in Palestine a national home for the Jewish people, as the Zionist movement had hoped. Zionism has had multiple currents, but the dominant strand of political Zionism in the years leading up to the creation of the State of Israel was that which, in Ilan Pappé's words, sought an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine that was both a safe haven for Jews from persecution and a cradle for new Jewish nationalism. Keep in mind, there are actually a number of Jews who very much eschew this idea of Judaism being married to any political project. They see Judaism as a religion, and they're people like True Torah Jews. They're quite an interesting group to look into. At the end of World War I, Britain occupied Palestine, which had been part of the defeated Ottoman Empire. As you said, Joseph, completely right. The League of Nations created a legal mandate for the British presence in Palestine and included the entire text of the Balfour Declaration. The declaration, Ibrahim Abu-Logod explains, undermines the Palestinians' right to self-determination. You said it helps indigenous people have self-determination, but here's how it undermines the right to self-determination. It does it by denying the Palestinian and Arab identity of the affected people, by failing to reference either a national or cultural designation of Palestine's population whose civil and religious rights would be protected by its terms. On the other hand, to help Jewish people in Palestine the declaration was very specific about the Jewish people. Very little, almost no mention of Palestinians. Very specific about what Jewish people would want. The League of Nations mandate said Britain had a responsibility to help Jewish people in Palestine create national institutions, a task that included Jewish settlement. Even today, David Cameron, for example, was not today, but when he was in power, even he was very skeptical about, the settlements. He thought they were illegal. Most European leaders are very on the fence about it. But they don't look at the fact that we actually helped to start those settlements, to begin the settlements up until today. Britain, we're a nation of amnesiacs. Before you go to other countries, my friend, maybe just have a look at British history first, right? We're in Britain. We should look at what our leaders have said throughout history. So, yeah, okay, great. At the same time, the population of Palestine was 10% Jewish and 90% Arab. So 10% Jewish, 90% Arab. But remember, Balfour read the Bible every night. It's hard to believe. Britain is such an un-Christian country today. It's very irreligious today. There was a time in 1917 where British people were deeply religious. The majority of people were very religious. Balfour was a Christian Zionist. Very much believed that it was the fulfillment of the Bible to settle as many Jewish people back in Palestine as possible. The League of Nations mandates that Britain had a responsibility to help Jewish people in Palestine create national institutions, a task that included Jewish settlement. At the same time, the population of Palestine was 10% Jewish and 90% Arab. But, as Rashid Khalidi points out, not one of the mandate's 28 articles related to the Palestinian people per se. They were variously and vaguely defined as, quote, a section of the population, natives, or peoples and communities. As far as Great Britain and the League of Nations were concerned, they were definitely not a people. The Zionist movement created a Palestine Foundation Fund to organize Jewish immigration and colonization, and founded the Palestine Land Development Company as an agency of the Jewish National Fund, JNF. Read about the JNF. What
decade was this, by the way?
That's a very important, sorry?
What decade was this?
Well, we're talking here early 20th century, very early 20th.
Okay.
Which in 1901 was born from the Jewish Colonial Trust to buy land and hold it in trust exclusively for the Jewish people, exclusively for them. Non-Jewish people cannot own land that the JNF controls. I'll repeat that. Non-Jewish people cannot own land that the JNF controls. Policy that continues to the present day. This is what leads me to suggest it's actually more than an apartheid state. More than that. Although there are very interesting historical comparisons you can make with South Africa and Israel. Both of them settler colonial societies. I think it's why today, when Nelson Mandela came out of prison, there was an Israeli who wrote to him a letter. He said, finally you've left now and you can lead your people like Moses led his people to freedom. And then do you know what Nelson Mandela said back to him? He said, South Africa will never forget the support that the State of Israel gave to the racist government in South Africa. That's what Nelson Mandela said back to him. He said, we'll never forget that. So there's a lot of overlap and similarity. We can also learn a lot about Northern Ireland as well. Racist policies to Catholics in Northern Ireland. We can learn a lot about through comparison there as well. And in Cyprus and other countries as well affected by Britain. So during the 1920s, the Palestinians made up 80 to 90% of the population, while the Jewish inhabitants of the land accounted for 10 to 20%. Yet Britain attempted to put in place a political structure based on parity between the two groups, in contrast to the democratic principle of majoritarian politics that Britain paid lip service to in the other Arab states where it had influence. Initially, the Palestinians opposed the proposal, but then changed course in view of the growing number of Jewish settlements. So, they were very accommodating, a lot of them. In fact, when Jews first started arriving in Palestine, modern Jews, not the native inhabitants you talked about going back thousands of years, when the first big waves of Zionist colonizers arrived, the Palestinians were very welcoming, extremely welcoming when they first arrived. They had no idea what was going to come later. History gives us hindsight, doesn't it, really? Initially, the Palestinians proposed it, but then they accepted it. The Zionists switched positions in the opposite direction. Britain's failure to implement their promise of parity led to the Palestinians' 1929 uprising. So, talk about self-determination and how they were happy with it. There was an uprising in 1929, the Palestinians rose up. Britain's continued alliance with the Zionists precipitated the Palestinians' 1936 to 1939 popular uprising, which the British subdued with ruthless attacks on the Palestinian countryside. The Palestinian leadership was exiled, the paramilitary units it used against the mandatory forces were broken up, and many villagers were arrested, wounded or killed, all of which made it easier for the Zionists to take the Palestinian countryside between 1947 and 1949. You could just look at what happened in 1947 and 1949 and feel shocked at the way the media have almost barely touched on that section of history. Barely any. I remember Theresa May when she met the Israeli Prime Minister, and she said, we're very proud of Britain's role in the creation of the State of Israel. People should have been shocked when they heard that, when they considered what the State of Israel was founded on, the bloodshed and the violence and the rape that it was founded on. They should have been shocked that Theresa May said that. But we have a very obedient media, they're like lapdogs, really, The Guardian and so on. They don't want to include the ugly parts of British history. They don't want to include that at all.
It's about 8 minutes, just as a...
All right, I'm just going to finish the section on ethnic cleansing, and then I'll... On November 29th, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly passed Resolution 181, which is also known as the Partition Resolution, which Joseph spoke about earlier. The resolution divided Palestine, creating one Arab state and one larger Jewish state. The Jewish state was granted the most fertile land, and the resolution said that the city of Jerusalem would be under international control and administered by the UN. The partition resolution did not reflect the territory's ethnic composition, and that's very much in keeping with the way the British and the French carved out the Middle East. Divide and conquer. They would often create borders, very unnatural borders, right through ethnic land, so that tribes, especially in Afghanistan, it's the reason why it's one of the most complicated ethnic struggles today, especially in Central Asia as well, Uzbekistan and so on. When all that land was carved up, it created a lot of disruption, and here's a continuation of that. In many ways, the Zionist project is a continuation of the general European project of colonizing the rest of the world. It happened very late because Jewish people weren't in one nation, in one place. They were spread out because of various pogroms and exiles that have happened. But it was still a colonization project. This idea that they weren't settler colonists, like what the British did in Australia or South Africa, or America for that matter, the idea that they weren't because they didn't have a specific homeland, it's a ridiculous idea. The partition resolution did not reflect the territory's ethnic composition. The Jewish people owned only 5.8% of the land, accounted for at most 1/3 of the overall population, and inhabited less than 25% of the countryside, while most of the cultivated land was held by the indigenous Palestinian majority. If the UN had created a Jewish state out of the territory in which the Jewish people were living, the Jewish state would have been on 10% of Palestine or less. Instead, the UN allotted Zionists control over territory that included 499,000 Jewish people and 430,000 Palestinians. And the UN allotted the Palestinians control over territory that included 818,000 Palestinians and 10,000 Jews. Think about that for a second. It makes no sense. Zionist leaders accepted the partition plan, but their Palestinian counterparts and Arabs elsewhere in the region rejected it, suggesting instead that Palestine remain a unitary state and that negotiations over the future of Palestine continue. And you know what? The student movement in England, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, trying to do what we did to South Africa, boycott, divest, and sanction South Africa, we're trying to do that to Israel today. And they are, a lot of them, calling for a one-state solution to bring the two countries back together. I'm very skeptical about that. I think it's better to stick with what the international community, what majority of people on the planet want, and have two separate states, and have truly autonomous Gaza. That would be really, take Gaza and take it from being a giant prison camp and basically turn it into a functioning state. That would be, Gaza's economy is almost completely collapsed now. It's almost completely, there's actually a financial crisis happening right now. Its water is almost completely controlled by Israel, and many people don't even have proper running water in their house, or hot water. It's a very terrible state of affairs. I let you speak for a while. Do you mind if I just finish this section? And then, it's not long, it's just 2 more pages. Thank you for bearing with me while I read this. I think it's worth having a really in-depth look at the picture. That's why I speak about this. So, that only one side in Palestine-Israel ethnically cleansed the other demonstrates the folly of presenting Palestine-Israel as a story of two sides who have inflicted similar degrees of harm on each other and who are equally responsible for decades of violence. This is the dominant media picture we get. Most British people are completely confused and disoriented about Israel-Palestine. You ask them about it and they think, it's something about religion, something about land, and they think roughly 50-50 is the violence. But actually it's overwhelmingly the ethnic cleansing and the violence is done to the Palestinians. So, though through a campaign of mass violence, Zionist forces drove out, exactly as you said, 750,000 to 800,000 Palestinians, or more than half of the Palestinian population. Imagine if a state came to England and drove out half the population of England. Yeah, you call that ethnic cleansing. Just imagine if that happened. Even if they drove out 10,000 English people, we'd call that an ethnic cleansing. All right? 531 villages were destroyed. More than half the Palestinians driven out of Palestine and destroyed half the villages and towns. 500 villages destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods were emptied of their inhabitants. Such acts were carried out by the Haganah, the Zionist quasi-regular military force that included a commando unit called Palmach, in coordination with the Zionist splinter groups, the Ergon and Lehi, whom the British called the Stern Gang. There was a guy at Speaker's Corner who spoke about the Stern Gang. They actually killed British citizens before. Blew up a hotel. Do you know? Maybe you could tell. Do you know about it? You're nodding your head.
I can talk about the King David Hotel when you.
Yeah, King David Hotel. Very interesting. No, and also the American this book also touches on the American relationship with Israel, which is incredibly important to understand. The way America uses Israel, kind of like it uses Britain as a giant airbase for its. So it kind of uses Israel as a proxy force as well. Kind of similar in Japan as well. Israel, Japan, and Britain are the most important appendages to the U.S. empire, and in many ways they're just glorified military bases, really, for a lot of American attacks. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit.
We'll see.
See what you think. I'm interested in your reasoning faculty and hearing what you think. Try and get you to decide whether what I'm saying is true or not. It's up to you to decide that. The morning after the UN adopted the partition resolution, the Ergun and Haganah terrorized the 75,000 Palestinians in Haifa by setting off car bombs, covering the streets in fuel and explosives, then lighting them on fire, and machine gunning Palestinians when they came out of their homes to extinguish the blazes. On December 31st, Zionist forces killed more than 60 Palestinians in the village of Balad al-Sheikh and expelled the residents of Wadi Roshmiya, an Arab neighborhood in Haifa, blowing up their houses. This is conveniently left out of the narrative that Joseph very kindly led.
You've been up for 15 minutes now.
In March 1948, Zionist leaders began to implement Plan Dalet. You mentioned Plan Dalet.
I did.
A blueprint for the expulsion of as many Palestinians as possible. Enacting this plan entailed carrying out acts of mass violence in many Palestinian towns and urban centers. The Zionist forces, Ergun, Lehi, and Haganah took the Palestinian town of Deir Yassin in April and massacred between 254 and 350 Palestinians, 75 of them children. On May 14th, Israel declared itself a state. The next day, Iraq, Egypt, Syria, and Transjordan launched a joint military intervention with the support of smaller contingents from Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the Volunteer Arab Liberation Army, which you mentioned, Joseph. The Arab states did not stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. I'm not saying Israel is responsible for all the problems in the Middle East. By no means. Israel itself and Britain and America have helped a lot of the radical Islam in the Middle East themselves. France as well. France is a less important one, but it's definitely key to helping to prop up really terrible Wahhabi regimes in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, Egypt. Israel fits into this picture quite neatly, actually. They would much prefer to be attacked facing a group like Hamas rather than a unified pan-Arabist state. Radical Islam is a much better force to work with. I promise you I'm almost finished. The Arab states did not stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. More than 60,000 Palestinians were expelled from the towns Lydia and Ramleh in July with the direct involvement of senior Zionist leaders like Yigal Allon, Moshe Dayan, Yitzhak Rabin, and David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister. But there are some very harrowing quotes from David Ben-Gurion. I read some really frightful quotes that he spoke about in terms of ethnic cleansing. He's very explicit about what he was trying to do. At the end of October, the Israeli army massacred between 80 and 100 unarmed Palestinians, some of them children, in al-Dawayma, after Israel already had control over the town, and after Israel had already won the border war. Civilian victims were thrown into pits, women were raped, houses where the elderly were locked inside were blown up. Palestinians were expelled from the Galilee in a series of massacres the same month. The diary of Yosef Naamani, director of the JNF in the Galilee, includes accounts he perceived of rape and of 50 to 60 peasants being tied up, shot and buried in a pit in Saf. I mean, that brings to mind some of the atrocities committed by Stalin and Hitler, actually. In my mind, it brings up images that I remember from what I was taught at school about the dictatorships in the 20th century.
Can I respond to any of these
That's
points?
frightening. That's really frightening. Naamani recounts Israeli soldiers being greeted with food and white flags. Being greeted with food and white flags in El Aiban and Faradia, and then killing 30 people and leading the rest out of the town and towards Lebanon. After Israel became a state in May 1948, it passed a series of laws giving the JNF dominion over massive tracts of Arab land, quote, whose proprietors, in order to prevent their return under any circumstance. And that's another thing as well we don't talk about. Do Palestinians have the right to return to the lands taken from them? They fucking do. They do. All right, let's always remember that. That's a human right, to have the right to return to land that was stolen from you by a foreign oppressor. That should be a basic human right. By the end of the 1948 war, Israel had control over 78% of what had been Palestine. Gaza was in the Egyptian domain, while Jordan was in possession of the West Bank and East Jerusalem.
Can we break this and then you can continue
presenting
reading?
Palestine Israel as a story of parallel misdeeds and hardships obfuscates the systemic dispossessions and massacres of one side by the other. A relationship which continues to impact present-day events. Remember, these are not just events of the past. They look, literally, just that and that. Nothing. It is not both sides in Palestine, Israel, who are keeping millions of refugees from returning to their homes. Let me repeat that. It is not both sides in Palestine, Israel, who are keeping millions of refugees from returning to their homes. In January 2014, UNRWA reported having more than 5 million registered Palestinian refugees. More than 5 million Palestinian refugees. In its biennial survey, Badal Resource Center for Palestinian Residency and Refugee Rights, a Palestinian NGO that is special consultative status with the UN's Economic and Social Council, says that at the end of 2011, there were 7.4 million Palestinian refugees. 4.8 million registered refugees from just from 1948, ethnic cleansing, and another 1 million from Israel's 1967 occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, and more than 500,000 internally displaced persons on either sides of the Green Line. The Green Line is the demarcation between the State of Israel and East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, stolen land, again, from Syria, and the Sinai Peninsula, which was established in 1948 after the previous year's war. While Israel's law of return allows anyone who the state deems Jewish to become a citizen of Israel, Israel refuses to allow Palestinian refugees to return to their homes, though their right to do so is enshrined under UN Resolution 194. Media coverage suggesting that Israelis and Palestinians have wronged each other to similar extents ignores that it is only one side that made millions of people refugees and that is responsible for them continuing to have that status. Only one side. Israel's abrogation of the right of Palestinian refugees to return directly impinges upon current events. This is relevant. When you read media stories, they often only give you context in the last couple of months. Go back into history and you get much better. Palestinians, if not always their leaders, insist on their right to return. And so Israeli denial of that right, that legally protected right under international law, last part there, is a key reason that peace eludes the Middle East. Someone asked in the audience, you asked, why is there conflict? This is one of the main reasons. You're not allowed to return to your home, there's going to be conflict. Imagine if you were kicked out of your house by a stranger and you weren't allowed to back in your house. Imagine how you feel.
Did I have the right to go back to my home if I'd been kicked out?
That's a key reason why peace eludes the peoples of Palestine and Israel, and that the conditions necessary for events like Protective Edge continue. Eliding the refugee issue by subsuming it in a both sides framework conceals a major grievance that Palestinians have, one with a basis in international law. This narrative makes the Palestinian case appear weaker than it is, and serves Israel by glossing over an injustice that the state has done, and continues to do so to the Palestinians by preventing the Palestinian refugees from returning. I'm going to let my friend get up now and speak. He's going to speak in response.
Right, thank you. And I have to go back to Palestine.
Okay. So we covered an awful lot of ground. Remind me, what was your name? Carl. So first and foremost, I don't know if I'm arguing with Carl or Greg Chapat, the author he just read from. Now there's a certain arrogance that ran through your entire narrative. And I'll explain what that arrogance was. I have read dozens upon dozens upon dozens of books. Guys, we're speaking. If you want to have a separate conversation, go over there. I've read dozens and dozens and dozens of books. For over 15 years, I've studied the conflict. I wrote article after article. I produced maps which talk about the populations and the things you're talking, which I'll share with the camera. Now, you got on the ladder and read from one book as your evidence for the conflict. There are so many narratives. There are so many narratives to what is actually going on. To assume that one book has the truth as if it's the Bible or the Quran is insanity itself. The second most arrogant thing you did, you, a white British man, stood up on a ladder here and started talking about the ills of colonialism. The ills of colonialism. You, as a white British, then said, I know the solution. In the land, they want one state. Many Palestinians want one state. Many Israelis want one state. But I, a British white man, know best. We should have two states because I, the white colonialist, know best.
I'm actually South Africa. It's even worse. I was born in South Africa.
So I'm going to address. I am going to try to address as many of your points as possible.
Take as much time as you want.
But we covered a lot of ground. Yeah. So forgive me if I miss a few, and I'll have to consult my phone to try and keep up with and try and weave some sort of narrative towards this. So one of the things I want to start with is you quoted a historian, and I use historian with inverted commas, called Ilan Pappé, who seems to be the background for the book you're reading, Chapat. Now, Ilan Pappé belongs to a new generation of historians. They're not that new anymore, and they look to challenge the narrative of the conventional Israeli historiography. And what happened was that probably the most prominent and most well-respected by both the pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli left and right divide is a historian called Benny Morris. Benny Morris slaughters Ilan Pappé because Ilan Pappé writes as a political person first, which he admits, and a historian second. As a historian, you can't allow your bias to dictate your history. Now, Benny Morris is I don't like Benny Morris, he's hard on Israel. But he at least has the decency to follow what he perceives to be the objective truth rather than his politics. Now, what you read from that entire script was pure propaganda. Pure, unadulterated propaganda based on the work of Ilan Pappé. And Ilan Pappé himself is a propagandist. But what I will try and do, I will try and deal with so many. I made some very loose notes. So let's start with where you finished off, because it will be still fresh in the audience's mind. And that was Resolution 194. Now you declared, and again, this is all coming from my mind, not a paragraph that I just read in a book. I've actually researched this. So Resolution 194, no, thank you, gold star or a sticker. Resolution 194 talks about the right to return for the refugees. Now, which refugees is it talking about? Is it talking about the Palestinians, or were there more than just Palestinian refugees in this conflict? Is it as completely one-sided as you portray, or were there also Jewish refugees? So you talk continuously about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. It is not an Israel-Palestine conflict. It's an Israel-Arab conflict. The major wars have been fought where tens of thousands of people have been killed, have been fought between Arab armies and Israel. Not Israel and the Palestinians. So the first mistruth that you paint is that it's not this asymmetric conflict where you've got this big behemoth of a state called Israel and these tiny, weak, oppressed Palestinians. Wrong. This is Israel facing a sea of hostile Arab nations that have invaded it on numerous occasions and have stated explicitly time and time again, our intention is to destroy the Zionist enterprise, is to destroy Israel, is to drive the Jews into the sea. So what happened with the creation of Israel in 1948 and before? What happened was there was around a million Jews living in the Muslim world, around 850,000 of them living in Arab states. 850,000 Jews were driven by the sword or fear of death from their Arab lands which they'd lived in before the Muslim conquest of those Arab lands. So the ancient Jewish communities of the Arab world were slaughtered, were driven out. Now where did they flee? Where did those refugees go? They went to Israel. 850,000. You want to talk ethnic cleansing, you want to talk genocide, there's less than 3,000 Jews left today in the Arab world, and almost all of them are in Morocco, which isn't really an Arab state, despite, oh God, it was colonized, like most of the Maghreb, by Arab conquest, Muslim. And so the Jews who'd lived there, 850,000, there's now 3,000. How about Palestinians? Does anyone here today know how many Palestinians live in the West Bank and Gaza?
I believe it's about 1 million or 2 million.
No, it's a lot more than 1 million or 2 million.
Sure, go on, tell me.
So there's
5 million.
1.5 in Gaza, and in the West Bank?
Maybe 4.5.
4.5, 5.5.
I thought you were talking about Gaza, yeah.
So you've got millions and millions and millions of Arabs living in Gaza in the West Bank, 3,000 Jews living in the entire Arab world, and you have the audacity to talk about ethnic cleansing? We were cleansed from our land. We lived there long before the Muslim conquest. We were cleansed. So you have a very one-sided case. So when Resolution 194, to bring it back, when Resolution 194 talks about the right for refugees to return, it's not just talking about Palestinians, it's talking about Jews as well. Jews lost over $250 billion worth of property. How much property do you believe the Palestinians lost? Virtually none. Now I created an infographic, where I actually, in 1945, the British did something called the Village Report. The Village Report was a consensus of the population of Israel, the West Bank and Gaza. Now what you'll find is when the land was partitioned, you probably can't see this, but this is for your benefit in the camera. This is the Palestinian land. This is the Arab land. Arabs held most of the land in the West Bank. Jewish populations were outside the West Bank. The majority of the land of Israel and Palestine was unoccupied. Has he run away?
No, he's still here.
Okay. Are we doing this or not, Carl?
I'm sorry, I apologise. Sorry.
So the majority of land that the Israelis were awarded was either controlled by Israel, Jews, in 1945, or it was ownerless. It was Ottoman state land. The majority of the land that the Arabs held, who you call the Palestinians, was in the West Bank. And that's why they were awarded the West Bank. The partition was along population lines, where the large Palestinian populations were, or the Arab populations, they became known as the Palestinians later, where the large Arab populations were, you had an Arab state. Where the large Jewish populations were, you had a Jewish state. The reason Israel is bigger, as you stated, was they had the Negev Desert, which is the big triangle beneath the West Bank. Now that is a desert, it's barren, you can grow virtually nothing there. So that you talk about Israel getting the fertile land. They got swamps in the north, which they drained and turned into fertile land, but they were swamps before that, and they had barren desert in the south. So another mistruth. Then moving on to Palestinian national identity. We keep talking about Palestine, 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 Palestine. First and foremost, a little history lesson. Palestine comes from the word Palishtim. Palishtim is a word which was translated into English as Philistine. The Palishtim were a Greek Cypriot people, white Europeans, who came and conquered a little tract of land near Ashkelon, Ashdod and Gaza City. No relation to the modern day Palestinian people. So where does the word Palestine come from? When the Romans conquered Judea and drove out most of the Jews, to humiliate the Jews, and Judaism at that point was a threat to the Christian faith, which was just taking root, and the Jews at that point were very close to the Roman emperors, or just before that they were. Herod was best friends with Mark Antony and people like that. So the Romans, to humiliate the Jews who they overthrew and defeated the uprising, the revolt, they called the name Syria Palestina. Now where was Syria Palestina? Syria Palestina stretched from Egypt all the way up to Turkey. It was a huge swathe of land and it was a province of Rome, named in such to humiliate the Jews who were rebelling against the Roman Empire. The Palestinians, I'm going to read now a quote from an individual called...
Oh, you're reading?
Pardon? Well, one quote, just because I don't want to mispresent him. But
yeah, I read a book, he's reading a phone.
There is no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. The evil Zionists invented the term Palestine. This is by Oni Abd al-Hadi. Now, Palestinian national identity really took off in the 60s under Yasser Arafat. But even at that point, King Abdullah of Jordan and Yasser Arafat were both on record saying in the 60s, there is no such thing as Palestine. Palestine is Jordan and Jordan is Palestine. There is no difference. And when you go to mandatory Palestine, which we were discussing, this is exactly what they're quoting. British mandate of Palestine was awarded on the condition a Jewish national home was created. The first thing the British did wasn't side with the Jews. The first thing they did was carve out 75%, 78%, and give it to the Arabs. Not under an indigenous family that had lived there for centuries, under a Hashemite family. The Hashemites tried to take Syria, Iraq, Jordan. They came from Saudi Arabia, and they were given the award. Now, with the creation of Jordan, what should have then happened was the remainder, at the very least, should have become the Israeli state. But what happened? There was a civil war, as you pointed out. But it wasn't the Jews that started the civil war, it was the Arabs. You mentioned the uprising in 29 and just glanced over it. Jews in Hebron who'd lived there for centuries. We know they'd lived there for centuries because in 1517 they were massacred by the Ottomans. The Jewish community of Hebron in 1929 was decimated. Babies' heads were smashed off walls, like brutal. And the ancient community that had lived there since time immemorial was forced to flee. Which leads on to the next point. What happened in 1948? So first, actually, before I jump to that, you said that the British were on the side of the Jews. That was your consistent narrative.
I didn't. They often play divide and rule. You know?
It
would support both sides.
But your whole argument was Britain. You were kind of saying Israel was a colonial project of Britain, and then America.
No, I never said that. Israel was a colonial project of Zionism. It's its own movement.
Okay, so
it's not part
to
of
address
the
that. So just in case anyone in the audience thinks that Britain was on the side of the Jews,
it supported both.
So
I'm
just going to show the actual objective truths of what happened, and you mentioned one of them. So the first thing that happened was in 1947, there was the vote for the partition. Now, 33 states voted in favour of the creation of Israel. 13 states voted against. No surprises who voted against the state of Israel. 2 states abstained, or at least 2 in Europe abstained. One of them was Britain. Britain, the nation that you claim was fundamental in the creation of Israel, abstained to even recognise the creation of Israel. America did, the Soviets did, everyone else did, but Britain abstained. Then what happened? So what then happened was in 1948, mass conflict broke out, and the British started helping and arming the Jordanians, and they led many of the Jordanians from the front. So Britain was complicit with the Arabs, not the Jews.
I'm aware of that, yeah.
And further, so what then happened was Jordan conquered the West Bank. Egypt conquered Gaza. What was the first thing Jordan did when it conquered the West Bank? It declared itself sovereign over there. It annexed the West Bank. what happened? Britain was one of 2 nations in the world, I forgot the second one, but Britain was one of 2 nations to recognise Jordan as sovereign over the West Bank.
The Hashemites were one of our main allies in the Middle East.
No occupation, no freedom of Palestine movement then. And what were the Palestinians saying? We're Jordanian. Many of them were granted Jordanian citizenship. In fact, the Jordanians to this day are the only nation that has ever granted Arab nation, ever granted Palestinian citizenship. You want to talk about apartheid in Lebanon? Palestinians aren't allowed to own property. They're not allowed to go to the state schools. They're not allowed to access state healthcare. They're not allowed to travel. They're not allowed to get citizenship. Even though they're 3rd, 4th generation residents of Lebanon, they're denied citizenship and they're discriminated against. In Jordan, in Israel,
why have you not mentioned the 1917 Balfour Agreement?
Okay, so we'll go back in history further.
He's got a lot to cover.
But that's fine. So to talk about Balfour. So what was the Balfour Declaration?
You jumped in some things. You don't say. You mentioned how the Palestinians ended up as refugee in their own.
I can't really hear you.
Homeland, and also in Jordan and in Arab states, such as Lebanon.
Sorry, say what? I can't hear you.
You didn't mention how the Palestinians end up as refugee within their own country.
Okay, so it's kind of what we're talking about. We have been. You've come late to the conversation. We've definitely addressed the 1948 war, and we'll continue to address it. But what was the Balfour Declaration? The Balfour Declaration of 1917 was not a legally binding document. It was a recommendation that Her Majesty's government would support the idea of a Jewish national home. Now, it doesn't say what a Jewish national home is, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of the people who are living, the other people that are living in the land.
But you have to admit, the main movement in Zionism was exclusivistic. It wasn't like
but again, let's look at the facts. So Jordan conquers the West Bank and enacts a law called then became Article 6 of the Palestine Liberation Army's National Charter. The PLO National Charter, Article 6, was based on Jordanian law. What does it say? It says that no Jew that wasn't living here before 1917 will be allowed to become a citizen of this state. In contrast, over nearly 20% of Israel's population are Arabs. You talked about apartheid, you're wrong. Those Arabs have complete equality with Jewish citizens. What you make the mistake of, and is what most people do, and it's a twist, it's a propagandist twist, is they will say, well, look at the Palestinians. They don't have the same rights as Israelis. Well, of course they don't. I don't have the same rights as a Frenchman. I can't vote in French elections. I can't access French healthcare. They're different citizens. Under the Oslo Accords, the Palestinians are autonomous in areas A. They have shared autonomy in area B with the Israelis, and the infrastructure and the like in area C is provided by Israel. So, coming back to the point, the Jordanians ethnically cleansed the Jews from the land. They then enacted a law which forbade Jews from becoming citizens. When the Palestinians eventually took over from the Jordanians as the leading governmental force in that land, they reinforced that law with Article 6. I will challenge you to find me any law in Israel that denies property, citizenship, anything like that to Arabs. You will not find it. What you will do is quote the JNF. Now, the JNF is a private organisation which was built on the idea that Jews would purchase land in Israel. They were given millions of dollars by international Jewry, Jews living around the world, and the idea of buying up land, not conquering it with sword, buying up land for the Jewish people. So because they took that money on the principle it was for Jewish people, they then can't sell their land to Arabs. Now, I don't like the law. I don't like that thing, but that was how that money was given to them, and they're kind of locked into that. State law is very different. State law does not deny Arabs the right to purchase property. They have access to the same healthcare. They have access to the same education. If I go to an Israeli hospital, most of the doctors, or many of the doctors, are Arabs. Many
if I go to a Gazan hospital, it's not a hospital.
There's no Jews there. Thank you. If you go to a Gazan hospital, there are no Jews there. So you talk about ethnic cleansing.
There are no humans there. It's rubble. It is rubble.
I listen to you. I listen to you. So turn to listen to me. I didn't interrupt you once. We're having a two-way conversation here.
Actually, try and make it everyone involved. What's going on here?
You talk about, Israel doesn't deny.
I've been talking for, when I talk for 5 minutes, this guy stood for 20 minutes.
No, just to correct you.
So what we see here, what we see is constantly a perversion of reality. The Middle East is in flames. Millions of Muslims are slaughtered around the world by largely other Muslims, not white British, not Americans, largely other Muslims killing other Muslims. The Palestinian conflict, since its inception, has had less than 100,000 deaths on both sides. To put that into context, Syria, 500,000 dead in a few years. Iraq, as you said, in around how many years? It's over 1 million. It's a huge number killed. Yet we focus and we obsess on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Why? Because they're the only minority to get a state in that land. The reason the Arab world spits out the Jews, the reason the Muslim world spits out the Jews, is because they're Jews.
It's not a religious conflict.
Really? So okay,
religious component.
Let me respond. There were more Muslims slaughtered in Yemen last year. There were more Muslims slaughtered in Balochistan, in Pakistan, last year than there was in the entire Israel-Palestinian conflict. Nobody cares about these conflicts. Why? Al-Quds. The reason that this conflict occupies the West front of mind, occupies Arabs front of mind, Muslims front of mind, is because of Al-Quds, Jerusalem. It's bad enough when Muslim armies lose territory in Al-Andalus, in Spain, but to lose the third holiest site in Islam is unbearable for most more extreme Muslims. And that's why the catalyst for the interest of the global community... How long do you have to go? Sorry.
Another hour. He's got time. Please let him. He's got as much time as he wants.
Why is Al-Quds, why is Jerusalem important? You have a mosque called Masjid Al-Aqsa, which is the third holiest site in Islam. The reason it's important for Jews is we were slaughtered, we need a safe haven, it's our indigenous land, we've been there since time immemorial. We tried living under you guys, didn't work out great for us. We tried living under you guys, even the Moroccans, who were one of the best Muslim states in the world, didn't even under Morocco, it wasn't so great. We tried living under other nations, and you killed us. You slaughtered us generation after generation. We were slaughtered. We finally get a land.
Mohammed VI, the king of Morocco.
The king of Morocco is an absolute legend. I love the king of Morocco. He saved the Jews in Morocco. The king of Morocco is not the Moroccans on the streets who murdered us.
Moroccan Jews, in Israel, they're still pleading allegiance to the Moroccan king in Morocco right now.
So all the Moroccans are getting really prison now.
You saying Moroccan murdered Jews?
Yeah. And rubbish.
Show me evidence.
Show me evidence. Absolutely.
They were killing in the street. Rubbish. That's a Zionist propaganda.
In the 50s, during the Moroccan civil wars, when they threw off the French, Jews were killed. But the Moroccan king was a legend and protected the Jews and saved Jews from the Vichy government, saved Jews from certain death from the Nazis. But this is what Muslims often do. Muslims will take an example of one good caliph, of one good king, of one good time, and then apply it for all time. There were good Muslims and there are bad Muslims. There were good Jews and there are bad Jews.
You mentioned earlier thousands or millions of Jews being kicked out of Arab countries. You never said when.
Okay, I'll say
let
when.
me finish.
Say when then.
And how they survived more than 3,000 years in among Arab and Muslim. Just 1 second. You're telling so many propaganda things to this audience when you say the million of Jews being kicked off Arab countries. My brother. That happened after 1948. They survived. I'm from Iraq. They have a ton.
When was the Farhud?
My brother. Okay. Listen up. In Morocco, there's so many Jews. In Iran, there's 70,000 Jewish people live in Iran. In Morocco, so many. My brother, how they survived for all these thousands of years?
I'll tell you
My
what.
brother. I'll answer the question. How they survived this thousands of years? Arab and Muslim, they never killed Jews. The people who killed Jews are Christian and Germans and European people.
So I'll respond to that. So Christians save Jews. Christians kill Jews.
No.
I'm going to. Muslims kill Jews and Muslims save Jews. I'll give you the examples. So the Farhud in Iraq, sir. I am.
Brother, my question was, when they left.
I'm trying to answer.
Listen,
let him answer his question.
Rabosai.
It's toxic. Listen, I just just to inform you, on the eve of 1948, with the Jews.
Let me just deal with one. No. We'll come to. I'll address it, then I'll address you. So in the 30s, Jews were massacred in Iraq. It was the thing of the Farhud. Over 1,000 Jews were killed. It's called the Farhud. Farhud. By Arabs.
At that time wasn't Arabs. Syrians.
Show me the names.
In 1930.
How many?
1930.
Yeah.
Where in Iraq?
How many?
So Baghdad.
How many?
Seriously?
Yes.
You must be joking.
Okay, so here we go. We'll go to trusted Wikipedia. So it's unbelievable.
You're telling fake.
You have to go back. Go back and get your facts right.
Okay.
You know why? Because the Jewish agency was very active to immigrate.
What is the percentage of Jewish in Iraq?
Jewish I made a mistake. I made a mistake. The Farhud
Why don't you
not
put
in
a lie?
the 30s.
I made a lie.
You're not making a mistake. You're telling a liar.
The Farhud was not in the 1930s. It was in 1941.
Oh, it's rubbish.
My mistake was the
rubbish.
thing.
Nothing happened.
Now listen.
No, you listen.
The Farhud, you asked me a question, I'm responding to you. The Farhud responds to the pogrom, the massacre, violent dispossession carried out against the Jewish population of Baghdad, Iraq, on June the 1st to June the 2nd, 1941. Immediately following the British victory in the Anglo-Iraqi wars, the riots occurred in a power vacuum following the collapse of the pro-Nazi government of Rashid Ali. While the city was in a state of instability, the violence came immediately after the rapid defeat of Rashid Ali by the British forces, whose earlier coup had generated a short period of national euphoria and was fueled by allegations that Iraqi Jews had aided the British. Over 180 Jews were killed, 1,000 injured.
Not thousands.
So I got that wrong. So I make mistakes. There's a lot of knowledge in here, but sometimes I make mistakes. Over 180 Jews were killed.
And why?
So,
That's a bit less than 1,000.
yeah, okay.
No, he said million.
He
said million of Jews being kicked
I said
from our country.
I said 1,000 Jews. It was 1,000 Jews injured. I got my numbers mixed up.
Can I correct you for us?
I'm trying to address one point.
Just one point.
No, I'm going to come to you, but I'm going to come out. If you don't, I'll just ignore you. So to my point, in 1929, Jews were massacred. In 19...
I'll just be right back.
Okay, so anyone can Google the Farhud. Anyone can Google the Aden riots of 1929, where 80 people were killed. Anyone can Google the Hebron and the Safed massacres of 29. Anyone can Google the massacres in Tripolitania. Anyone can Google the massacres in Cairo. Anyone can Google these Jews that were massacred. Now to come to the most pivotal point. The most pivotal point. No, let me speak. The most pivotal point. You and I will both acknowledge that 850,000 Jews lived in the Arab world. Ask yourself one question. If life was so good under Islam, why are there only 3,000 left now in Morocco?
I'll answer your question.
Let me answer.
Sorry. You know why? Because the Jewish agency.
It's the Jews.
Yes, the Zionist Jewish agency was very active to immigrate Jews from the Arabic land into Israel. So it's become more populated and to overcome the population of Palestinians.
It's almost a good point. It's almost 2 minutes. Let me just finish it and then you.
Iraq 2003, there's not 2 million Iraqi refugees around the world.
Then you. So he made a point.
Yes.
Now, what I'd like to point out is very simple. He's saying that it's because the Zionist Jewish agency tricked them into leaving.
Oh, yes.
Now, ask yourself a question. If you're a Jew occupying an okay standard of living, why would you suddenly flee? The communities of Western and Eastern Europe, where Jews... Listen, I listen. Listen. I listen to you. You listen to me. The Jews of Europe, where they were decimated in the Holocaust, burned in the ovens, not a great place to live, not so many fond memories of what happened to Jews living in Eastern and Western Europe. They are in their tens, if not hundreds of thousands. The Jews of the Arab world, where it was allegedly amazing for the Jews to live, there's less than 3,000 left. Simple question. Why did the Jews remain in the lands where they were slaughtered in the Holocaust, but flee the Arab world? Economic reasons.
Yes, because that's why. 1 second. That's why you see a lot of Arab immigrating to the Western world because of the economic reason. Let me go back to the Iraqi said when Iraq actually killed the Jews because the Jewish Iraqi helped the British army to fight the Iraqis, right?
So this is
you're not making sense, man.
This is what
if you help a foreign army to fight in your country, of course you're gonna kill.
British army, they left Iraq.
And there we have it. The Jew is the eternal outsider in the Arab world. Did you hear that? If you help the British, if you help fight a foreign army, you, the eternal outsider, the wandering Jew, the eternal Jew, you're a traitor to your Muslim.
Let me remind you. Can you, 1 second, can you tell me?
The Jews lived in Iraq before the Muslims.
One second.
The Jews lived in Iraq before the Muslims. The great kingdom of Babylonia had Jewish citizens.
Let's go back. 1 second. Let's go back to the history. Let's go back to the history. Let's go back. 1 second.
Against your own country.
1 second. If you go back to the history, you're gonna die. Don't worry. Nobody's gonna touch you. If you go back to history, 1 second.
انت قلت
Listen, brother. 1 second.
Thank you very much for speaking.
I have a question for you. Listen.
Thank you, Joseph.
Let him go, brother.
Joseph,
where do you go?
Joseph that's the first time Joseph has spoken at Speaker's Corner, and he's been coming here for 7 years. That man's been coming here for 7 years, and it's the first time he's spoken on my land. Now, I disagree with a lot of what he says, but he's very articulate. Sorry, my friend. It was very worthwhile to hear his opinion, so I'm really glad he came up and spoke.
From now to man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
My name is Carl Farron. I've been speaking here for a couple of years. It's one of my favorite places in the world, Speaker's Corner. It's the only place I know of where you can do this. Maybe in the Palais Royal in France, back in the day, you could do this. Maybe there used to be a place in Tower Hill where you could do this in London, but this is the only place where you can do this. I'd like to get my friend up here to talk about the most important issue of the day, as far as I'm concerned. His name is Teo, and he's from the organisation Extinction Rebellion. Please give him a nice round of applause. Teo, come up and speak.